There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after. Mine began on a dull Tuesday, with that humid heat that sticks to your skin and makes everything heavier. I was home, still in my pajamas, hair tied up carelessly, when the doorbell rang. I had no idea that on the other side of that door was the answer to questions I was afraid to ask. My Aunt Helena never showed up unannounced. She was methodical, the type who scheduled lunch 3 weeks in advance and confirmed by text the day before. So when I opened the door and saw her standing there, with that small box in her hands and a look I'd never seen before, I felt a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. The golden wrapping paper was slightly crumpled at the edges, as if she'd held it too tightly for too long. The bow was excessive, disproportionate, almost ridiculous for such a small box. But what really caught my attention was the way she looked at me. It wasn't the affectionate gaze of the aunt who used to take me for ice cream when I was a child. It was something else. Something between relief and guilt, as if she were handing me a burden she'd carried for years and could finally put down. I took the box without understanding. My hands trembled slightly. "Aunt Helena, what is this? It's not my birthday." My voice came out weaker than I wanted. She just smiled, in that crooked way people smile when they're about to cry but can't. "I know, sweetheart. But it was time for you to have this." Her voice failed on the last word. She kissed my forehead too quickly, like someone fleeing, and left before I could ask anything. I stood there at the door, holding that ridiculously small box that weighed like lead. I looked at the empty hallway where my aunt had disappeared and felt that something fundamental had changed, even without knowing what. I sat on the living room couch with the box in my lap. My fingers slid over the golden paper while my heart beat irregularly. I had that strange feeling of being about to open something I shouldn't, like when you read someone's diary and know you'll regret it, but can't stop. I undid the bow slowly, almost reverently, and tore the paper carefully to avoid making noise, as if someone could hear me. The box was wine-colored velvet, worn at the edges. When I opened it, the air seemed to grow denser. Inside, on a satin lining stained by time, was a silver locket so tarnished it bordered on black. It was large, heavy, the kind you see in period films. The design on the front was intricate, a tree whose branches curved to form an almost perfect circle, as if embracing something invisible. The roots mirrored the branches, creating a disturbing symmetry. I picked up the locket and it was cold, much colder than it should have been. I ran my fingers over the relief and felt every groove, every imperfection. And then came that feeling. That irrational weight of recognition, like when you hear a song you swore you'd never heard but can anticipate the next note. I knew that design. I didn't know from where, didn't know when, but it was engraved somewhere deep in my memory, in a place I wasn't conscious of having. My hands trembled when I tried to open the locket. The small clasp was stiff, resistant. I had to force it, using my nail until I felt it would break, until it finally gave way with a dry click that echoed in the silent room. Inside, where I expected to find a yellowed portrait or a lock of hair, there was only cold metal and a minuscule inscription, almost illegible, engraved with a precision that seemed impossible for something so old. March 15th, 1987. I stared at those numbers as if they would change if I blinked. A date. Just that. No context, no explanation. But my stomach turned in a way that only happens when your body knows something your mind is still processing. I spent the rest of the afternoon on that couch, turning the locket from side to side, trying to extract some meaning from it that made sense. I called my aunt 3 times. The first time, it rang until it went to voicemail. The second, it was immediately busy, as if she'd declined. The third, it didn't even ring. It was turned off. When night came, it brought with it that suffocating anxiety. I placed the locket on the nightstand and lay down, but sleep didn't come. I kept looking at that dark object against the light wood, watching it capture the dim light from the lamp, and felt I was missing something obvious. The date hammered in my head. March 15th, 1987. March 15th, 1987. Why did that bother me so much? That's when I jumped up, my heart already racing before I even confirmed it. I went to my bedroom closet, where I keep things I don't have the courage to throw away but don't know where to put. At the bottom, under a pile of old notebooks and forgotten planners, was my teenage diary. That faded blue notebook where I used to write every little drama as if it were the end of the world. But it wasn't teenage drama I was looking for. It was something else. Something I'd written down years ago, in a fit of morbid curiosity about my own family. I flipped through the pages hurriedly, passing by complaints about school, confessions about unrequited crushes, plans for the future that never materialized. And then I found it. March 15th, 1987. The date of my grandfather's disappearance. The diary fell from my hands. My whole body went cold, then hot, then cold again. I sat on the edge of the bed because my legs wouldn't support me anymore. That couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't be. My paternal grandfather, Carlos, was a ghost in our family. Not literally, because nobody knew if he was dead or alive, but in the sense that nobody talked about him. I grew up hearing half-sentences, stories that began animatedly and ended abruptly when someone realized they'd said too much. Your grandfather was a man. Well, that doesn't matter now. He liked to, never mind. The adults exchanged glances when I asked, changed the subject with suspicious skill, diverted my focus to other things. I knew the basics. He had disappeared one March morning when my father was 15. He left for work and never came back. Didn't take clothes, didn't empty the bank account, didn't leave a note. He simply evaporated, as if he'd never existed. The police investigated, of course, but found nothing. No body, no clues, no sign of violence. He simply ceased to exist. And now my aunt was giving me a locket with the exact date of that disappearance engraved inside. Why? What did she want me to do with this? I couldn't sleep that night. I lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the locket even without touching it, hearing the tick-tock of the clock that seemed louder than ever. Each passing minute increased my certainty that I needed answers, and that my aunt was the only person who could give them to me. The next day, I woke up with that furious determination that comes from lack of sleep mixed with frustration. I didn't even have coffee. Just got dressed, grabbed the locket and left. The journey to Aunt Helena's house never seemed so long. Each red light was torture, each person crossing slowly in front of me made me want to scream. When I arrived, I didn't even ring the doorbell. I knocked on the door hard, 3 times, with no patience to wait. I heard dragging footsteps on the other side and then the door opened. My aunt looked different. She seemed smaller somehow. Older. She looked at the locket in my hand and her shoulders fell, as if she'd been holding her breath and could finally exhale. You found out, she said. It wasn't a question. Found out what, Aunt Helena? Found out that you gave me a locket with the date my grandfather disappeared? That? Is that what I was supposed to have found out? My voice came out louder than I intended, loaded with anger I didn't know I was feeling. She stepped back, leaving space for me to enter. The house was too quiet, as if even the furniture was waiting for what would come next. We sat in the living room, facing each other, and the silence stretched until it became painful. I needed to give you this, she began, and her voice was different. Weaker, older. Because you deserve to know the truth. Because you're the only one who can know. The truth about what? About Grandpa Carlos? About what happened to him? I leaned forward, squeezing the locket until I felt the edges hurt my palm. My aunt closed her eyes for a moment too long. When she opened them, they were moist. Your grandfather didn't disappear, dear. He fled. He fled because he had to flee. Because staying meant putting all of us in danger. The world stopped. I heard the words, processed each syllable, but they didn't make sense. Danger? What kind of danger? What are you talking about? I can't tell you everything. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't know everything myself. Your grandfather told me just enough so I could protect the family if something went wrong. And he made me promise that when the time came, I would pass this forward. She pointed to the locket. This is yours by right. You're the firstborn of the next generation. The responsibility falls on you. What responsibility? Aunt, you're not making sense. My voice began to fail. Tears of frustration burned in my eyes. She got up and went to an old sideboard in the corner of the room. She opened the bottom drawer and took out a yellowed envelope, folded and refolded so many times that the creases looked like scars. Your grandfather left something behind. Something that can only be accessed by someone of direct lineage. Someone who carries the mark. What mark? What lineage? Aunt, this sounds like a movie. I know how it sounds. Believe me, I thought it was absurd too when he told me. But this is real, my love. More real than you imagine. She extended the envelope. Inside are instructions. An address. The place where your grandfather hid a box before leaving. A box that can only be opened with that locket. And only by someone of direct blood. I took the envelope with trembling hands. The paper was warm, as if it had absorbed decades of anxiety. Why now? Why after so long are you giving me this now? Because the location is no longer safe. There are people. There are interested parties getting closer. And because you're old enough to deal with what you're going to find. She held my face with both hands, forcing me to look into her eyes. Your grandfather didn't leave because he wanted to. He left to protect us. And he left this so that one day when it was safe, someone could know the truth he never had a chance to tell. I left that house staggering, as if I'd taken a punch to the stomach. The envelope burned in my pocket. The locket weighed on my neck, where I'd placed it before leaving. The streets seemed strange, as if I were seeing everything through a different filter. People passed by me living their normal lives, having no idea that the ground beneath my feet had just cracked. I spent the next 3 days in a loop of disbelief and curiosity. I'd open the envelope, read the instructions written in handwriting I didn't recognize but that had something familiar in the angle of the letters. Close the envelope. Put it in a drawer. Swear I wouldn't follow through. Then take it out again. Read it again. The cycle repeated until I lost count. The instructions were too specific to be a lie. An address in a neighboring city. An old building. A specific apartment that, according to the notes, had been abandoned for decades but secretly belonged to the family. Exact coordinates of where to look inside the apartment. It seemed like an adventure movie script, but the shaky handwriting and precise details screamed truthfulness. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke up and knew I was going. I couldn't resist anymore. Curiosity had devoured all the fear, all the hesitation. I needed to know. I needed to understand why my entire family had lived in a lie. Why I'd grown up without knowing my grandfather, without even having the right to know the truth about him. The trip to the neighboring city was a blur. I don't even remember driving, just suddenly being in front of a building that seemed to have been forgotten by time. The facade was peeling, some windows boarded up. It looked like the kind of place that would be demolished at any moment. I entered using the key that was in the envelope. My hands were sweating so much I almost dropped it twice. The lobby smelled of mold and abandonment. My footsteps echoed in a way that made me feel smaller. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, counting each step to keep my mind occupied, to not think about the absurdity of what I was doing. The apartment was locked, but the second key in the envelope opened the door without difficulty. The sound of it opening was the loudest I'd ever heard. Inside, everything was covered in dust. Old furniture covered by sheets that were no longer white. The smell of stopped time. I followed the instructions as if in a trance. 3 steps from the door. Turn right. Lift the floorboard near the window. And there it was. A metal box, smaller than I'd imagined, with a strange lock that matched perfectly with the shape of the locket. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my temples, in my throat, at my fingertips. I took the locket from my neck and with hands that trembled uncontrollably, fitted it into the lock. It turned perfectly. As if it had been made yesterday. As if it had been waiting for me. The lid opened with a sigh of old air. And what I saw inside changed everything. Documents yellowed by time but still legible. Letters in sealed envelopes. Black and white photographs of people I half recognized but couldn't name. And a notebook. A brown hardcover notebook, with pages full of tight handwriting. I picked up the notebook first. I opened it to the first page and the first words cut me like glass. If you are reading this, it's because you are strong enough to carry the weight of truth. Forgive me for not having had that strength in life. It was my grandfather's diary. I sat right there, on the dusty floor of that abandoned apartment, and began to read. And as I read, as I turned page after page, my world collapsed and rebuilt itself at the same time. My grandfather wasn't who I thought he was. My family wasn't what I thought it was. Our history was infinitely more complex, more painful, more impossible than anything I could have imagined. I discovered there were old debts, not of money but of honor. I discovered that my grandfather had witnessed something during the military dictatorship, something that put him in the crosshairs of powerful people. I discovered that he had tried to report it, that he had tried to do the right thing, and that it almost cost the lives of the entire family. The letters revealed threats. Detailed descriptions of how my grandmother was followed. How my father, still a child, was almost kidnapped one afternoon leaving school. How my grandfather realized that the only way to protect everyone he loved was to disappear, to make his enemies believe he had died or fled so far away he would never be found. There were photos of places he visited after fleeing. Letters never sent to my grandmother, each one tearing my heart a little more. Declarations of eternal love mixed with desperate requests for forgiveness for abandoning her. Explanations of how he monitored the family from afar, making sure they were safe, living only to be certain that his sacrifice had not been in vain. And there was more. There were documents that proved his accusations. Evidence he had collected over the years, waiting for the day when it would be safe to reveal everything. Names of corrupt military officers, records of torture, lists of the disappeared. It was enough material to reopen investigations, to bring justice to dozens of families. I cried. I cried until I had no more tears. I cried for the grandfather I never knew but who had been a silent hero. I cried for the grandmother who died without knowing her husband had never stopped loving her. I cried for my father, who grew up believing he'd been abandoned when in fact he'd been protected with a love so great it demanded an unimaginable sacrifice. When I finally managed to stop crying, when I finally managed to breathe normally again, I felt something different. Relief. Deep and immense relief. Because finally everything made sense. The silences, the looks, the half-stories. Everything had a reason. A terrible, painful reason, but real. And along with the relief came responsibility. Because now I knew. Now I carried the truth. And I needed to decide what to do with it. Today, as I write this, the locket is beside me. It's no longer a mysterious or frightening object. It's an inheritance. It's physical proof of my grandfather's impossible love, of my aunt's courage in trusting me, of the weight my family carried in silence for so many years. I don't yet know what I'll do with the documents. Whether I'll make them public. Whether I'll seek the authorities. Whether I'll simply store everything and let history sleep a little longer. But I know I was chosen for this. Not by chance, but by lineage. By blood. By destiny, perhaps. And I know that my grandfather, wherever he is, trusted me to make the right choice. The locket is no longer just a key. It's a promise. A promise that truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds a way to the light. And that love, even when it needs to hide in the shadows, never really disappears. I am the guardian of this truth now. And that both frightens and strengthens me. Because finally I know who I am. I know where I come from. I know what my family is capable of. And that certainty, as heavy as it may be, is also a liberation.